You're listening to the Feel Good Astrology podcast with Louisa Tannermunson. To request your personal reading, go to feelgoodastrology.com.
Hey, welcome back. It's Louisa Tannermunson from Feel Good Astrology, and this is a bit of a spontaneous and slightly, I don't know, I want to observe the patterns to do with the coronation and the House of Windsor with the looming coronation of Prince Charles III, or King Charles III, sorry. Yeah, and the just spidey senses tingling somewhat. I mean, are they tingling for you? I know they are for me. Now, I've checked in with a couple of astrologers, and I also did a lovely little, I had a little nice video chat with one of my astrologer friends, Alexandra, Jowett, and we had this lovely chat, and I was asking her, like, what do you think of this coronation video? This coronation date and time. And yeah, we've got some kind of similar views. She raised some really good points. So here's how I'd like this video to work: is I'm going to explore some of the queens, like Queen Elizabeth II's birth chart, and Prince Charles or King Charles III's birth chart, and also look at both of their coronation charts. And see what similarities there are, and also, what's different about them. I've already drawn the charts up, and I've already recorded a little bit about my thoughts about the actual coronation itself, based on the chart. And to me, it doesn't look like a particularly strong day, although it really, really fits into his chart. But then when I've had a quick peek at the queens, like Queen Elizabeth II's chart, it's just so strong. It looks so solid, which I guess it would. She was in power for a really long time. Did you see my pen there? I've got one of those. I used to love these pens as a kid growing up with all these different colours. So anyway, I digress. I'm really looking forward to checking out these charts and seeing what is uniting them, and getting a feel. And I'm also going to play Alexandra's, version of it as well. What does she think is going to happen, and comment a little bit on it. It's really good what she shared, and I'm really grateful to her for it. So anyway, let's have a look first of all at Queenie's chart. I think that's where I'd like to start. So this is QE2 birth. It's Queen Elizabeth II birth, 21st of April 1926, 2:40 a.m. In Mayfair, London. Now, I already checked this out just to see if she was coming in around the time of an eclipse, and I've also checked out to see if she was if a coronation was around the time of eclipse, and it wasn't. But I know that Charles was, and also that his coronation is linked in with the eclipses. So Queen isn't, though I do know there are other royals that are, because I have had a little look in the past. Now, the thing that, first of all, that really strikes me about her birth is that her ascendant is in the sign of Capricorn, which is very stoic, very kind of responsible. And, the ruling planet of Capricorn is Saturn, and Saturn is right at the top of her chart. So the midheaven, which represents our destiny, our responsibility in the world, how we get to be known, and what people might know about us, is very much dominated by this very strong Saturn here. She'll play by the rule books as they appear. She will appear to be following rules, following regulations. She, what she says will go. She would have been very stoic, very proper. You might have thought, from a distance, that she was quite miserable, because she wasn't one to necessarily, looking at this chart just on the outs, just on the first two things that I see, is like, crikey, this is a very serious person that takes responsibility really seriously. So yeah, it's huge. Now, she is born, this is interesting, just as the sun is at 0 degrees in the sign of Taurus. So it's a kind of changing picture as she comes in. And she's also in a conjunction with Chiron, which I find quite fascinating. You know, I use Chiron a lot, and I have done for years. You know, I see it as a wounded healer, showing us, you know, where a lot of the meat for the grist in our lives comes from. You know, it really shows us, you know, where our damage might be, and also where our greatest gifts are. Because obviously, you know, as we get through trauma and as we get through things that are trying, we tend to get mastery about them. So, you know, you often find a lot of people with a very strong Chiron, i.e. in a conjunction with the moon or the sun or one of the angles. You know, I would say a strong Chiron is seen in the charts of doctors, therapists, anyone that resolves things and helps people in particular, you know, come to terms with what is and what has happened. So it's really interesting, you know, that she's got this pattern of, you know, and I think there's a lot of grief and hurt and pain there, you know, showing at the end of her chart, and the sun being so close to it. It doesn't feel like, as I look at that, I think, ouch, not, oh, how fluffy and light is that? Actually, I think, ouch, that's cool. that doesn't feel very relaxed. Oh, look, it's fly season in Portugal now. The flies are back. The other thing that is intriguing, or not intriguing, I guess it's something that I would possibly expect, is that her moon is in the sign of Leo. You know, Leo is quite a regal sign, and also Ceres is in the sign of Leo. Now, Ceres is also known as Demeter. She's also known as Mother Earth, and I think these two can represent the mother, and in particular, like the moon, I think can represent the mother and the child. And so here we have the mother and the child together, or this idea of big mother, you know, the big mum, the mum of everyone. And so it's interesting that the moon and Ceres are together in the sign of Leo at her birth, because, you know, the Queen Mother lived a gazillion years. Okay, that's an exaggeration, but I mean, she'd have got a telegram from her daughter, put it that way. You know, she was pretty ancient. And, you know, for much of my life, and I've not really studied the royals, but growing up in the UK, you know, from what I do know is that the Queen Mother was quite close with her daughter, the Queen Elizabeth II. So it looks like there is a strong mum and a strong mum-daughter relationship. Go away, fly. And it just looks, it's so funny that they're both in the sign of Leo, which is about sovereignty. It's about the ruler. If you think Leo is the lion, the king of the jungle, you know, this is strong. And these, you know, her Saturn right on the midheaven in the sign of Scorpio, it's a fixed sign. Then you've got the moon and Ceres in Leo, which is another fixed sign. And then you've got her sun right in the first degree of Taurus, another fixed sign. And then we've also got Mars and Jupiter in a conjunction in her first house in the sign of Aquarius, which is kind of interesting because Mars is about taking action, and, you know, having, I think Mars in the first house is pretty active. It gives us quite a bit of confidence to take the lead, and to be kind of courageous. And with Jupiter there, it will absolutely fill her with quite a lot of vigor that would keep her going. In particular, I mean, what I quite like about this, and I think, ouch, that must have been really difficult, was this Jupiter-Neptune opposition at 22 degrees. But it's, you know, suffice to say, there's a lot going on in the fixed signs, and they're the ones that are really grabbing my attention. And like I said, she's got her ascendant here and her descendant there in Capricorn and Cancer, which are very, very traditional. And, you know, two of her angles are in fixed signs. So in the sign of Scorpio and Taurus. Now, the transits around the outside are for when she came into her power, like when she was, when she was crowned during the coronation on the 2nd of June, 1953. And here, like, Chiron is really strong. So, you know, it feels like the whole process of becoming queen happened at a time that was a very sort of visual and very obvious time of pain, or shock. Chiron going over the ascendant can show us coming into our mastery, but it can show the pain that might be associated with it. It's interesting on that day as well, the moon and the North Node were in a conjunction in the first house, though not like that massive, but, that's interesting to me. And I really like Venus down here in a conjunction with Chiron and the Sun. But let's just have a quick look. There are like different changing things happening. Pluto here, very, very close to her Neptune, and then in opposition to the Jupiter and Mars conjunction in the first house is quite interesting as well. But I just want to have a look at the overall theme of the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. And like you can see it's got like so many lovely blue lines, these trines just show where there's a nice easy flow of energy. Now, sure enough, there will have been trauma and intrigue and all sorts of different things going on in that life. But at the time of the coronation, like the coronation itself had a lot of ease and a lot of flow. To me, as I look at this, I think, wow, that was meant to last. That looks quite stable. And, I say stable quite deliberately because the ascendant is in a fixed sign, in the sign of Leo, which is very much about becoming king or queen, like Leo, the lion, the king of the jungle. It's very much about sovereignty. Like I said, Pluto was at 21 degrees, so it was right over her Neptune. If I just go back, you'll just see it. That's where Pluto was. So it's interesting that the ascendant is in the sign of Leo, but it also fits in with her birth chart quite well. So yeah, that fits in quite nicely. And Pluto's right on the ascendant, so close to the ascendant, showing like control. Interesting that Pluto, which is about control and power and wealth, immense wealth, it's in the 12th house, which implies that it's also quite secret and quite hidden. And there's a lot that we don't know about in her collective dungeons, probably. There's a lot of unmentionable stuff. And, Pluto can represent trauma and terror and fear and cruelty. And it looks like there's a lot of secrets here. And it's quite possible that, she was actually managed behind the scenes as well. I dread to think what was behind the facade, seeing that. Although, people are going to have Pluto in their 12th house all the time, but it often shows, where there are some real sort of like difficult patterns in the unconscious mind. But this isn't about her unconscious, this is about the time of the coronation. Go away, fly. Now I did actually put in asteroid Philip and Elisabetta to represent them. It's funny actually, because I do like to play around with asteroids quite a bit. And Elisabetta, which I selected to represent Elizabeth, because there isn't an Elizabeth, it is in a conjunction with the moon. So that's kind of interesting, at the time of the coronation, that even the asteroids are kind of lining up in a meaningful way. Like the moon is in the 6th house. The 6th house is very much about the job or the day-to-day running of what you might do. And it's kind of showing that, she is coming into her own space. Now, the North Node here is at 4 degrees in the sign of Aquarius, which is a fixed sign. So again, like the nodal axis is in a fixed sign. So there's, her leadership is fixed, and, her sort of like destiny and her direction is very fixed. Interesting, it's at 4 degrees in the sign of Aquarius, because it's pretty much at 4 degrees in the sign of Taurus, which is another fixed sign at the time of Charlie's coronation. So that's kind of fascinating. I don't suppose there's any accidents there either. Because there are always patterns within patterns within patterns. Now, this is interesting and very powerful, this Saturn and Neptune conjunction in the sign of Libra. It's lining up very powerfully to Mars and Mercury. Like Mars and Mercury are together in a conjunction at 22 degrees in the sign of Gemini. which is very, well, I mean, Gemini gets a bad rep, as being a bit sort of two-faced and changeable, I think is the nicer way of putting it. That they have ideas and they're able to hold conflicting ideas, hold two different ideas, three different ideas, really kind of juggle with ideas and actually kind of maintain them in quite a forceful way. So, I really see that she was able to hold lots of different things that would have been very conflicting in her reign. And hold them together anyway. And that was all in the 10th house. And then to support that, she had Saturn, which is showing the tradition, and also Neptune, which, yes, is creative and is at some level about how we let go of ourselves and how we merge with the infinite or merge with everything. But I also see that Neptune is highly tricky and quite possibly deceitful and hiding things. So it's very interesting. It's almost like there is a support mechanism to hide things and to help her hold separate thoughts in different ways, and to appear very thoughtful about it. And it's all fitting into this very powerful Pluto and the ascendant. Very powerful. That to me just looks super, super powerful. Then, the fact that the moon and the sun are 11 degrees, both of them in air signs. So yes, she's got this very strong sort of fixed, all the angles are in fixed signs, which really belies her actual birth chart. But her coronation is very air based. The sun, the moon, Saturn and Neptune, Mars and Mercury, and also Jupiter at 5 degrees. Philip's also showing up there by asteroid in the 10th house. There's a lot going on there. And then Venus, which is one of the benefic planets, is in a lovely trine with the ascendant. So, to me, this just looks like, all of these sextiles, these like 60-degree angles, and then this lovely trine. These are all showing ease. She had help. She wasn't doing it alone. She had a whole team of people wanting to help this come together. And then here, this is super interesting as well, I think, is the vertex. I like the vertex. It's a point, sort of like, it's a mathematically calculated point. And I always think of the vertex as being something that represents maybe what the world or life is wanting you to do. And her vertex or the vertex of the coronation is in a conjunction with Chiron. It is about taking a different look at the mastery of pain and the mastery of trauma. And it's kind of like, there's a certain amount that she's having to do as part of the coronation. So it's fascinating. There's a lot there, and I could talk more. I don't want to go too in depth, but it's interesting. And what does fascinate me is this midheaven in the sign of Taurus. Like Taurus, I think is a sign that has a quite a lot of longevity and a lot of wealth. If you imagine Taurus the bull, I always like to think of the oak tree. In fact, it's something that's very rooted and fixed, very natural. And it grows up and really, really strong. You can't budge it. Like, if you were to drive a car into an oak tree, I'm not suggesting you do, you're going to come off the worst. That tree is not budging. Just like a bull, it stands its ground. So, here I see the monarchy is, she's going to have all the pomp and rigor associated with Leo and all the flipping stability in the future. It looks like she's building castles in the air, but actually they're appearing very solid. It looks like there's a lot of tradition and a lot of longevity there. Now there are some similarities with Charles's coronation, but before I go there, let's just pick up on a couple of other things. So I was mentioning there's a lot of air stuff going on. And what fascinates me, like when I compare it back to her actual chart, like up here, you can't see it because a little Google Docs icon has just come up. But there you go. The Saturn and Neptune conjunction, which I said could be about holding things in place and possibly keeping a tight hold on rumors and slightly deceitful things. and slightly tricky things, slightly creative situations, let us say, they're showing up in the ninth house to do with like foreign travel and being away from home and experiencing life in a different way. So it feels like, in that position, at the time of the coronation, she knew that there was going to be not just stuff to be dealt with within her own country, but a lot of statesmanship, in terms of being out and about and being in other countries and keeping a tight rein on things. So there's a lot of strong patterns. So they were some of my thoughts about the Queen's birth chart and her coronation chart. And as you can see, her coronation chart just looks really quite smooth and easy. There's a lot of flow. Now, one of the things I do notice about people's birth charts and like just charts in general is like where you have a lot of blue stuff. Yeah, things are easy and quite graceful in many respects. However, it can be a bit too easy at times, like you might get too much help, you might not get challenged quite enough, or the challenges might not reach you, they might be dealt with by somebody else. So I do note that I suspect there was a lot going on behind the scenes to assist this to look as smooth as it did. And I often recognize that when there's a lot of red, squares and oppositions, that it obviously, it creates a lot of challenge for us, but it often enables us to rise to a much higher level or have the determination to go much deeper. So, her, by default, her chart just looks much easier than King Charles's. Before I go any further, though, let's bring on the thoughts of Alexandra Jowett, because what she has to say about it is really quite fascinating. And then I'll pick up and add in some more stuff. In particular, I'm going to touch on the comparisons between the two coronation charts and also the chart between mother and son. So let's have a look at, let's bring Alexandra on now.
A lot of my clients kind of say, oh, all these big guys, they must have astrologers. And then I'm like, well, I'm not so sure. Check out Elon Musk, wow, he definitely does not have an astrologer advising him. And I'm pretty sure also, unless it's an astrologer that doesn't want the best outcome, of course, that's always a possibility.
So what do you think about the coronation date then? Do you think it's a strong one?
It's strong. I don't necessarily think that means strong good, but I tend to not do good and bad anyway. But
yeah.
What's very interesting is that around the time of the new moon that this eclipse is coming into, the date was changed. All right.
So I didn't know that. Oh my God. Yeah. Tell me more.
So there was an original date, and then around the time of this new moon, there was some shenanigans, and of which, this is life now, shenanigans and malarkey. And then the date was switched. And when they announced this date and I had a look, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, what the hell is going on here? Yeah. Particularly, eclipses and the royal family go hand in hand anyway. A lot of them are born around eclipses, including Charlie, and it's his nodal return.
Yeah.
But with the Mercury retrograde on top, particularly given in Charles, I don't know how familiar you are with Charles's chart, but he's got Mercury in Scorpio on his south nodes.
I haven't actually looked properly yet. Yeah. Oh, so Mercury on his south node. That's kind of interesting then, isn't it?
It's hugely interesting because it's kind of like, right, this is big part of the karmic story for him is learning to handle Mercury energy. And here we are in a Mercury retrograde during a Saturn opposition. It's a Saturn opposition as well. And a nodal return. It's just all like, wow, it's such a big time for him. But if it was me and I wanted the best outcome, I probably wouldn't have picked this date.
No, absolutely not. Yeah. It doesn't strike me as being a particularly long-lived duration. I don't think it almost, to me, when I look at that date, I think, oh, that's been picked to fail or to go wrong.
That's what I meant. It's like you wouldn't pick it if you wanted success, but we don't know who's involved in this. And this could well be part of the karmic story with having Mercury and Scorpio on the South Node.
Yeah.
He's, especially opposite the moon, he's come up against this shenanigans.
Yes.
Prior life. So, and he's Leo rising, he's Leo rising. So the sun is chart ruler, and he's not, you look at his chart and you just think, this is not a man who's comfortable being in the spotlight at all.
Yeah.
And here he is at his Saturn opposition, out of duty, potentially being thrust into that role. And one wonders if it's, there are other forces behind that.
Yeah, I would say so.
I would too.
Oh, to be a fly on the wall.
Because she's going to be Queen Camilla, and like,
really, is that what she's going to be? Like Queen Camilla? Wow.
Technically, she'll be consort, but he wants a crown on her head. Wow. Which is interesting. But this country will never forgive the royal family for the whole Diana thing. Like, she's never going to have that space in people's lives. And so that's immediately going to get a lot of people's backs up.
Have you got any other thoughts about the coronation that I can weave in?
I mean, there is a big piece around Saturn in Pisces, and that you hadn't put on your list. So, and I think that really deserves a huge amount of attention right now, and it kind of weaves into when we start to merge into the Virgo Pisces axis, when the eclipses come around there, which isn't that far off, is it?
No, it's not.
That Saturn Pisces stuff is going to become like super duper relevant. And it is that kind of the bubble bursting point of the fantasy. I call it the death of woo.
Wow, death of woo. I love that.
Woo, and it's really interesting, and I don't mean this in any kind of disrespect whatsoever, but literally, as Saturn ingressed Pisces, we have this popular kind of TV personality over here called Mystic Meg. And she does the whole woo, like,
she does woo, doesn't she?
She does the woo, and she died literally as Saturn went into Pisces, and I'd been referring to the Saturn in Pisces days as the death of woo, and it was kind of like, oh goodness, that's quite literal, as often astrology be. And I do think it is going to be that whole the fantasy fairy tale of the royal family. It's kind of like, reality check. Actually, it's full of ne'er-do-wells, to put it mildly. It's full of people you wouldn't want to introduce to your own family or friends. Yeah, it's as dysfunctional as any family is, because that's what it is. And I think the era of worshipping these false idols, which is another Saturn in Pisces thing. And the Bible warns people of doing that. The golden calf. That's going to be a thing with Jupiter going into Taurus, is it not? The golden calf and the false idol. And, this, I think it's just wearing very, very thin, particularly with the cost of living crisis and everything. And he's pared it back. Apparently, he's like, we're not going to have the really big diamond on show, because that would be really rubbing their faces in it. The poor plebs. So I think the Saturn in Pisces thing is a big part of it, and it's his Saturn opposition as well. So he's really, I feel like he's being pushed into doing something that he's not at all comfortable with, and that it could well be a big piece of perhaps where does the royal family end in its current kind of formation. I think you've really tactfully described that. I really do, because it does feel like almost like he's in place to help the dissolution of it, like for it all to just collapse down. Wow.
Wasn't she brilliant? She's awesome. So I now want to just bring up some of my comments from my Feel Good Astrology show a couple of nights ago, where I was talking in general about the coronation chart for the 6th of May. So if you have already seen this, just click on in the chapter. And then what I'm going to do is compare the two coronation charts and also have a look at Queenie and Charlie. So this is the birth chart of His Royal Highness, as as some people call him. So now, when you're looking at a birth chart, we always pay a bit of attention to the ascendant, and his is in the sign of Leo. Now, the ascendant describes the sort of who the ruler is, like which planet is the most important planet. And in King Charles's chart, it would be the sun. The sun is the ruler. And his sun, in fact, he's got a lot of planets here in the 4th house, which to me is a real sort of indicator that he's not really somebody that wants to be in the limelight particularly, though he's got his moon right at the top of the chart. Now, it's interesting. A lot of people who are public figures, I've noticed in particular, like actresses and actors and musicians and stuff, in particular people whose public life seems to just be really well known, like you can't keep any secrets. It all comes out eventually. And they tend to have this moon in the 10th house. It's very difficult to keep things hidden when you've got that moon in the 10th house. So that's definitely attention for him. Now, I've got these little lines on. Now, that's actually really to show where the retrogrades are, the Mercury retrogrades, in terms of this year. And in fact, what I've just done is put on the details of the coronation around the outside. So these represent the planetary positions of where everything is on the 6th. Now, what's interesting to me, in fact, we can ignore this. This is where the retrograde is going to be in August, and this is where it is at the end of the year and also at the beginning of this year. But this is where we are right now in terms of, like, here's the sun, because we're right in the middle of Taurus season. And last week in this position here, Mercury started to move backwards. You can just see that there's Mercury. See that little, what looks like a person with horns with a little R to his bottom left-hand side. That's Mercury, and Mercury's moving in this direction. And around the 14th or 15th, he's going to change direction and start moving forwards again until the next retrograde in August, which is down, by which time Mercury will be down here. Now, these red dots are showing where the next eclipse is. And here's why a lot of people think that this coronation is an interesting one, because we've got a full moon the day before the coronation. And so the sun is here, because it's not quite here. It's just here, the day before. This is where it is on the day of the coronation, but this is where it is the day before, on the day of the full moon lunar penumbral eclipse. And this is where the moon is going to be at the time of the eclipse. So the moon is highlighting his 4th house, all things private. And the sun is kind of trying to get him to be very public. It's creating quite a pressure for him. Now, what interests me in particular is in Prince Charles's, or King Charles's, birth chart, his North Node, which is very much about his karma in life, and also the things that he's going to struggle with in this life, is at almost 5 degrees in the sign of Taurus. At the time of his coronation, the North Node is right slap bang over his North Node. So this is a real indication that this is the time of the cycle to continue, that the persona, and I'm saying that very deliberately, the persona and the life that we know of King Charles III is almost changing course or going into a new phase at this time when the North Node connects with the North Node. Now, in opposition to the North Node, we always have the South Node. Now, it's not actually pictured here on this chart, but it's essentially here. So at the time and date of his birth, the South Node was at 5 degrees pretty much, and his birth Mercury was in a conjunction with it. Now, the South Node shows what we're coming from. It shows the karma of, like where we may have completed on something in a previous life, if you believe in past lives. It also shows a part of our chart where things seem to be a bit easier, where we seem to have a handle on it. And he's got Mercury there, almost like he's come in with extra knowledge, like he's come in knowing where he came from and having some of these answers. Wouldn't it be great if we were born with this like handbook? You know how every car has a manual, or everything, I was going to swear then, everything that you get in your home, every appliance, everything has its own little manual telling you how it works. And we just don't know that for ourselves. We have no idea other than what we're told by experts. But, where do they get that information from, and who paid for that information, more importantly? So like, we don't really come in with this handbook of where we are, what we're doing, and we have to kind of learn it experientially. What it feels like to me with King Charles III is that he came in with all this information about what he was here to do, how he was meant to be, where he's come from. Feels like there's a lot of knowing there. Possibly a lot of old secrets and stuff. The 4th house, interestingly, is also one of the psychic houses, I would say, as is the 8th and the 12th. They are houses where secrets are kept in particular. Now, in the birth chart, we often look at the moon as representing the mother, and sometimes Ceres as well. I really like Ceres as she's like goddess she's like Mother Earth or Demeter. She is a very, very strong. So, I mean, some astrologers would fight me on this and say that the moon is the dad and the sun is the mum. I tend to reverse that just because of the people I've chatted with and in my experience of working, I would say that the moon tends to represent the mum a lot more. It's interesting that his moon is in such a prominent position in the 10th house, showing a very strong mum, a very sort of professional mum, and one who was in quite an interesting position, given that the moon is at 0 degrees in the sign of Taurus. Now, if we look at Ceres to represent the mum, it is also in a conjunction with Pluto, which is really, really strong. And it's in the 1st house, which affects his personality and his persona and his identity. So again, I would say this is definitely his chart, because, his mum is like one of the most powerful women on the planet. And it definitely affects his identity. Nobody can see him outside of that particular role. So some really big themes going on. And at the time of the coronation, yes, the South Node is down here, the North Node is up here. Mercury retrograde is in opposition to his Mercury, which again is pretty big. I don't think to me, it feels like there are secrets. Are secrets going to be revealed? Is it going to be a time of things collapsing? And, I don't necessarily think that the ceremony won't necessarily take place, but I think it's almost like once that ceremony has taken place, a whole bunch of other stuff is about to collapse, emerge, re-emerge. It just feels like there is something really fated, and very much fated about his life and possibly the history of the royals that is going to come forwards. Now, other things that strike me as kind of interesting is at the time that this is going on, we've also got Pluto in an exact square to his moon. And now that's really not comfortable. In fact, that's really deeply uncomfortable. And his Pluto is in a very dutiful place at the 6th house, which is very much about work and duty and also the physical health. It's a very, very serious time for him, and probably a time that's going to really age him. And this Pluto is heading up closer and closer to his descendant. It's not going to be there for a long time, not for another 2 or 3 years, but it's definitely kind of heading towards this angle, which is pretty big. These are epic times for him. And yes, his moon is at 0 degrees in the sign of Taurus. Now, interestingly, give it 10 10 days after his coronation, Jupiter is going to be exactly over his moon at 0 degrees. And Mars, by the 21st, this is off the top of my head now, is going to be at 0 degrees in the sign of Leo. And by the 22nd, 23rd, we've got this huge opposition between Mars, Pluto, and Jupiter. In fact, it's not an opposition, it's a T-square. So we've got a planet here, there, and here, right over King Charles III's moon in his 10th house, in his very public-facing position. This doesn't, I don't think this really bodes well, to be honest. To me, it looks like a whole bunch of things are triggering, which will bring up a lot of patterns to do with his mother, given that the moon can represent the mum. And, you know, when I look at the mum and, you know, think, well, she's represented by the sign of Taurus, you know, right on this cusp, it's very interesting, and she shows up here as well. Just feels very significant. And actually, when you do see, when I do record something in much greater detail about the link between him and his mother's chart, you'll see that there's a lot going on here between Leo and Taurus. In fact, I would say the House of Windsor is all about these fixed signs of Taurus and Aquarius, and also, Taurus and Scorpio and Leo and Aquarius. It's all pretty big. Now, we also have to add in the fact that Prince Charles, or King Charles III, also was born within 2 weeks of a total solar eclipse. And his coronation is taking place 2 weeks after a total solar eclipse. In fact, the day after the penumbral lunar eclipse, which kind of closes it off. This is also pretty significant. You know, his coronation is taking place at a time that his birth chart has a coding for. So that seems a little bit kind of interesting. Yeah. So in 1948, literally 13 days before he was born, there's the total solar eclipse. And that would have occurred at 8 degrees in the sign of Scorpio, because I've looked it up already. And so you'd have had the moon and the sun at 8 degrees in the sign of Scorpio, in a conjunction with his south node. That's fascinating. And also in a conjunction with Mercury. So it's really kind of interesting that at the time of his coronation, you know, there's a lunar eclipse in opposition to the eclipse that he was born under. There's a lot of big things going on. Anyway, let's just have a look at the whole idea of it being a mind spell. So this is actually, it does look like I've just gone back to his chart, because the ascendant is in the sign of Leo, but this is actually the chart for the actual coronation itself. Now, here's the big question, and that is, when does a coronation actually happen? I think the ceremony starts at 11, and that's just a procession, like going towards Westminster. And I've looked on the internet, and at the time when I was looking up the chart details, I couldn't get a closer time as to the moment where the crown goes on his head, or when he says whatever it is he says. A bit like when you get married. When do you actually get married? Is it at the start of the ceremony? Is it when you say I do? Is it when the ring goes on the finger? Or is it when you kiss the bride or the groom or whoever? You know, there are lots of different things that we can talk about with there, but I'm taking it as 11 a.m., which is when the whole thing starts to unfold. And yes, the ascendant is in the sign of Leo. Leo is the star sign associated with the king, and also with royalty in general, and being the best, being the cream of the crop, so to speak. We've also got, like, the moon is at 24 degrees in the sign of Scorpio. King Charles III, his sun is at 22 degrees in the sign of Scorpio. So the moon is right on his sun, which is kind of interesting. Like I said, the the sun is in opposition to his sun. So it's like there's a lot of things triggering in his chart to show a fundamental change. But at the time, this is where I think we need to be careful, is the idea of, is this a bit of a spell? And I'd love your thoughts on this. Do you think if you're pledging allegiance to somebody, if you're saying a particular words of a ceremony at the same time as something taking place, do you think it's a spell? Do you think it's part of something that's helpful? I guess it doesn't matter how you judge it, but can you see that you might be, actually, as I see this chart, this is about the coronation. And it's interesting, isn't it, that there's a coronation almost ending the time of the coronavirus, the whole like spell of the coronavirus, the whole period of time that we've had where it appears that the world has gone into a bit of chaos. And then as the CDC is announcing the end of it, as things are really winding down all around the world now, that there is the coronation. I think there's some interesting little parallels there from the name in its own right. But anyway, the sign of Leo is about sovereignty. So this could be very much about, a king coming into his rightful place, but it could be about us coming into our rightful place and space. At the time of the eclipses, there is this huge karmic load, and it is a chance for the whole of humanity to work towards something. There tends to be a lot more earth changes around that time and big events taking place. In my May forecast, I have alluded to the fact that there are some really big energies, and in particular around the 20th to 23rd, when there's a lot of things at 0 degrees here, in Cancer and in also Gemini as well. There's a lot of energy at 0 degrees. There's a new start. There is the feeling of a change. And we are in the real sort of precursor to it. I do think there's going to be something really quite dynamic that takes place. And to me, it feels like it all starts to come into clear and sharp focus after the coronation of King Charles. Now, do I think that this is a strong chart? Yes, I do. Obviously it's got the Leo thing. It's happening after a full moon. I think tensions will be raised, and it is an eclipse. It also fits in with his chart perfectly, which was all about the eclipse. So I can see why they've chosen that particular date. However, when I look at all of these big old squares, the square energy between all the planets, there's not much ease. To me, it looks like there's a lot of crankiness. There's a lot of stuff to discover. Also, it's covering the fixed signs, and the fixed signs are very much about where things have been rigid. Now, in my more full expose of the coronation, and also looking at Queen Elizabeth's coronation, and she was there for a really long time, obviously, there were lots of beautiful trines. So these lovely long blue lines of 120 degrees, signifying where things are easy. Her coronation just had lots of that going on in it, and I can show you in the bigger one. But this just looks to me like things are not very stable. Last thing that I want to comment then is like Mercury's retrograde. Most astrologers would recommend that if you're going to engage in any kind of binding agreement where there's a contract or expected outcomes, that you wouldn't do it at the time of Mercury retrograde, unless you've got a Mercury retrograde pattern in your own chart, which King Charles doesn't. Mercury retrograde shows changing thoughts and maybe the need for things to be reevaluated. So it seems very strange that just after a full moon, after Mercury retrograde, and just at the tail end of the eclipse season, they would consider putting on a coronation. Also, the moon will have been thrown into the waning phase, which is about things getting smaller, things closing down. Surely if you were going to have a triumphant message about the monarchy, you would want it through a waxing phase, which is when all the avid moon-based gardeners and people that really know their stuff, that's when they're sowing their seeds and putting their plants in. It's during the waxing phase where things are growing. Or why wouldn't you just wait another month, and find a better date when there is not this huge testing kind of square energy. I mean, you can see it all coming in. It's like right angles. And this is what I'm talking about. By the 20th, 21st, 23rd of this month, May 2023, there's this very sharp right angle forming between Pluto about transformation, corruption, secrets, ultimate power, and deception, like really nasty old violence. Mars in opposition. Mars is the other sign of violence and male things, no disrespect to guys, but things that go a little bit awry. And then Jupiter, the other planet, which expands things and makes things, inflames situations, makes them go huge. So, we have got this potential between Pluto and Mars in opposition, set off by Jupiter saying, come on then, let's bring it on. Just after the event of the coronation, that just seems a bit dodgy to me. Add in the fact also that when this goes off, all of this comes into play with the North Node and then the South Node down here. Also, the fact that this is taking place with the moon in the sign of Scorpio, which is ruled by Pluto and Mars, and neither of them are particularly happy. This doesn't seem to bode well. It's not a fuzzy message of monarchy is great. This is a message that something is likely to change and collapse, and maybe it needs to. So there you go. I'm really not mincing my words here. I just don't think it's a very good date. It's an interesting date. It definitely matches in with his chart, but it almost feels like it's set up to fail. Okay, so I've already chatted around, the coronation chart from my perspective on my chat show the other day, and I was probably a little bit sort of blasé about it. So we do have this shared Leo ascendant with the Queen's chart, but as you can see, there's more red. There's a lot more red going on there. So there's a lot of challenging energies at the time of the Charles III coronation in comparison to QE2s. I'm hoping to, let's just put a note in, QE2 photo. I'm going to pop that in so you can compare the two. And you'll see that this is just like a mass of contradictions and difficulty. So the sun is the ruler of both of these charts. The sun is the ruler of Queen Elizabeth's chart, and obviously is the ruler of King Charles's coronation chart too. And they're both in a top position right at the top of the chart. But what I really see here is this Mercury retrograde just seems a little bit puzzling, and it's part of a series of squares. It's also connected into this, like I said, a 4-degree nodal position in the sign of Taurus, which in the Queen's chart, in the Queen's coronation chart, it was here at 4 degrees, very close to the descendant here, I might add. So again, it feels like the fixed signs around about 4 degrees seem very, very important. And then Chiron is interesting, because in the Queen's chart, Chiron was in a conjunction with the vertex, really showing that there is this need to address pain and to deal with that and somehow master it. And here it's in a really prominent position at the top of the chart in the midheaven, which I guess could come from the fact that, that these coronations happen because of the death of a parent. So, I mean, that would bring that up, I guess. Yeah, we're not seeing so many of the same patterns, that we saw previously, and in the Queen's charts, the Queen's coronation chart, which had loads and loads of stuff in air, it's not much in the air this time. There's just like Venus here, and then Juno, which is also like high love. But like the air is really quite missing. But the earth here seems quite strong. And if we just look down here, yeah, it feels more earthy and fiery. And in particular, very much in the fixed signs. And Queen Elizabeth II is very different. So again, the fixed just seems to take precedence, but it just doesn't look as strong. It looks fraught with conflict. You know, maybe the time that was going on in the world when QE2 had her coronation, you know, maybe it was the right time for a new monarch, whereas now it just looks like things just aren't quite working. And I've already, you know, shared my thoughts about what it's like doing it after the big eclipse. So anyway, let's just have a look now at their charts together. So let's have a look at their synastry. I think that would be quite sort of interesting to look at, is how do their charts meet up. So here we are. I've got an image of there's Charles. That's his chart in the middle, and then Queen Elizabeth II on the outside. So we can see some of these patterns. I love looking at the birth similarities between a mother and child. I always think that's fascinating. So here we've got a lot of similarity showing that, one belongs to the other, so to speak. And this is what you might come to expect in the charts of people that spend a lot of their lives working together, being together, and having some kind of strong resonance. So it's not unusual to see, a parent's sun reflected by the child's moon. These sun moon connections really are quite beautiful, and quite you see them a lot, where my moon is as well in my chart with my two of my boys. We've got one of their ascendants is in the place of my moon, and the other has their moon in the same place, so we get these lovely little connections. But here we've got the sun and Chiron in a conjunction with Prince Charles's or King Charles's moon. So that's interesting. Like whatever burden his mother carried, he will have to emotionally deal with. That's a huge thing. And also the North Node in his chart showing his destiny is very much sort of based on what his mother has achieved, including all the pain associated with it. And then down here as well, his personality is absolutely dominated by his mum's seriousness. If you remember, Saturn is right at the top of her chart in the midheaven. And so what this is showing is her career is completely overlooking who he is, and also his Chiron. Isn't that fascinating that she's got the sun and Chiron in a conjunction together? He's got his sun and Chiron in a conjunction together. That's one of the good things about doing these kinds of charts where you're doing comparisons. You can easily see where there's some shared patterns, and I'm pretty sure this isn't the only shared pattern that they have. There'll be others. I'm quite sure of that. So yeah, they've got these connections. Interesting, like there's something called transactional analysis that you might pick up in psychology. I've done a video about it quite a few years ago. So just check in, I think it's the psychological astrology playlist. There's this great book that I bought years ago called Astrology in the Games That People Play. And it uses the sun, the moon, and Saturn to describe the three different characteristics that we have within our ego. So, Saturn represents our grown-up parental self, the sun represents our assertive self, and the moon, our childlike, irresponsible self. And so it's interesting that the sun, the moon, and Saturn are, all showing up in some kind of connection. The next thing that I think is kind of fascinating is this area here. So the Queen and her moon and Ceres, which is very overpowering as a mum, showing her overpowering mum and how she might be overpowering as a mum, is right on King Charles's Pluto, showing it's really difficult for him to have any kind of control because the matriarchs have got it. So, you know, one of his pains and one of his fears in life is that he's going to get overruled by his mum, which is pretty big. And then her Neptune is in a conjunction with his Ceres. Now, it's fascinating as well that Ceres represents the mother. And so his mother is showing up in the sign of Leo, showing that his mum, from his perspective, is likely to be super powerful, and also that she's in a conjunction with Pluto. She's like so powerful, like there's nothing he can do about it. So I think this is a fantastic little match here. I imagine that's really difficult. I shouldn't giggle and chuckle about it, but yeah, it strikes me there's a lot going on there. And then how his Pluto and Ceres conjunction in this first house, his need to be able to express himself free from his mum, is in opposition to her very strong and expansive will, you know, to have her way, in particular with his love life. So there's a lot going on there, and I'll allow you to, you know, draw your own conclusions from what you know about their relationship or what you care to know. But it's interesting, isn't it, that there's a lot going on in the sign of Leo. There's a lot going on in the sign of Scorpio. We've got these connections here in the sign of Taurus, and we've got the Queen's very, very strong Mars and Jupiter in the sign of Aquarius. So these are all the fixed signs in the places of interest between both of their charts. So yeah, I'm kind of happy that I've had a bit of an explore. I've had a chance to have a look at all of their charts, you know, both the monarchs charts and also their coronation charts. And yeah, just as I'm looking at it, I still maintain my view that it just looks like his coronation chart really does look like it fits in with his chart, and that it could be it doesn't look like a chart that is going to navigate the monarchy into a safer position. If anything, it just looks like what his coronation represents is a time of very, very deep dissolution and questioning and challenge. And the fact that they're all being really challenged in the fixed signs, to me, is almost like there's a bit of an earthquake going on. Things are very destabilized, very shaky, and not very certain. It looks like it's kind of really coming apart at the seams. And so whilst the Queen's coronation chart did fit into her chart, you could see how it was happening and how she was doing that sort of ascension, that rise up in her status. There was a lot going on in the air signs that didn't particularly relate to her birth chart, but it gave a new feel, you know? So I think the coronation chart really fits his complex character and really almost, I don't want to say mocks his life, but really reflects his life so far. But doesn't really show how he is separate. Like it's almost like he brings his life into the monarchy, into his position, but doesn't really lead from clear foresight and from a position for the future. It almost looks like the chaos that might be present in his chart comes forward into his monarchy. So fascinating. I wonder if the monarchy will survive this. And that's another question for another deep dive another day. But anyway, thanks so much for joining me. If you liked the cut of Alexandra's jib, then please do just check out below in the notes below. You'll see a link to her channel, and her channel is Jupiter Returns. And she does great work there. But anyway, lots and lots of love to you. And I hope you're well, and that you're able to like look at all these changes around the world and kind of have a little bit of fun with it. You know, these are times with really epic themes, and it could be really, you know, it could be kind of challenging for us all. You know, we could be feeling a little bit tense about it all, but actually I think there's not much we can do to change it. And the only thing we can really change right now is just how we see it, how we choose to be about all this stuff that's going on, that's playing out in front of our very eyes, like some ginormous karmic play. So take care, stay grounded and stay connected, and hopefully we'll chat soon. Bye for now.
You've been listening to the Feel Good Astrology podcast with Louisa Tanner-Munson. To request your personal reading, go to feelgoodastrology.com.